Colonel Richard Kemp, which many of us heard about him several years ago when he courageously spoke in the defense of Israel in the United Nations. And and turns out that he does much, much more for the state of Israel, and we thank him for that. And of course, he's going to speak to us tonight.
I want to bring the stage and to ask Mr. Kemp to speak. And I just want to say that working in the last few days with Colonel Kemp, and I think one of the strongest opportunity for each one of the Jewish people to hear what is meaning to look at Israel from different sides. And I believe this is part of the opportunities that Richard Kemp bring us. Richard, after 30 years in the British forces, we highly appreciate you joining the Israeli and the Jewish forces for Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eyal, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I know what an honor it is to be invited to speak to this Parliament. I know that many people, many very distinguished people, have spoken to you before, and I consider myself privileged to be now among that number. I don't know what it is about the combination between Israelis living in South Florida, but I've just found, I mean, today we were fortunate enough to have lunch with your Prime Minister, your President, and other cabinet members of the Parliament. That may be not quite the right terminology, but something like that. And what wonderful people, and what a wonderful reception and hospitality we've had here this evening as well. I really do appreciate your friendship and your warmth. So thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. I've spoken to the British Parliament not long ago, but it's a real pleasure to speak to a real Parliament. And I'm sure made up of people who have got more common sense between just a couple of you than the whole of the British Parliament often shows. Please do. I'm actually an excellent Hebrew speaker, and I would speak in Hebrew, but I don't want to show off, so I'll stick to English. Speaking of English, I haven't come. My technical ability is not high, unfortunately. Everything always goes wrong technically when I touch it. But speaking of, I haven't come here to speak to you about England, but I will just say a few words now, given the relatively historic events that we have been experiencing across the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And today, as I'm sure many of you will be aware, the Queen sent for Boris Johnson and asked him to form a government, and he accepted and is now therefore the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. He has a difficult challenge facing him. He is without a majority in Parliament, and with a huge amount of division and ill feeling in the country. He has got to achieve Brexit. On the 31st of October this year is what he promised to do. That will be our Independence Day, our equivalent of what you celebrate on the 4th of July every year. And people like me, not everybody, of course, in Britain supports Brexit, but people like me, I'm a fanatical Brexiteer, are looking forward to regaining our sovereignty and our democracy, which we haven't had since we joined the European Union. So he's got to achieve that. He's also facing a very tricky situation involving Iran at the moment. We have, if you don't know, we are holding an Iranian tanker in Gibraltar, which is British territory. Any Spanish here? Yeah, no one who will admit to being Spanish. Sorry, apologies. One brave Spaniard. The Spanish don't agree that Gibraltar is British territory because it's actually a bit of Spain, but we think it is. It's just one of the many places around the world we used to own, including, of course, this country and Israel. But we're holding a tanker there, and the reason we're holding that tanker it's nothing to do with US sanctions against Iran. It's because we're enforcing EU, European Union sanctions against Syria, and that Iranian tanker was heading for Syria, and it was illegal under EU law, and it transited through EU waters, so we seized it and we're now holding it. Of course, the EU, being an incredibly weak body of people, are now saying we shouldn't have taken it in the first place, even though it was EU law. But we'll roll with that one. And of course, the Iranians, completely unexpectedly. I mean, if you seize an Iranian tanker, who would expect Iran to seize one of ours? I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? You couldn't imagine it, but yes, they did. And we failed to ensure that they didn't, which was, I think, a huge failure on the part of our country. Anyway, he's got to face all of that very difficult situation. But actually, if you think about it, his challenges are nothing compared to the challenges faced by Winston Churchill the day he became Prime Minister for the first time, which was on the 10th of May 1940, the day that the Nazis invaded France. Can you imagine taking over as Prime Minister when you're at war with Germany, you've got an expeditionary force in France deployed, and you suddenly become responsible for it all? Now, yeah, Boris Johnson's got a challenge, but I don't think it's a challenge comparable to Churchill's challenge, so I'm expecting him to deal with this with relative ease. He is, I believe, staunchly pro-Israel. He spent time in his youth on a kibbutz, and he has declared himself to be a passionate Zionist. He has a good relationship with President Trump. And of course, whether you like President Trump or dislike President Trump, the relationship between Britain and the US, for us, not for you particularly, but certainly for us, is an absolutely vital one. So we can only hope that he reinforces and reestablishes the relationship between Britain and America, which has suffered somewhat under Theresa May, including some slightly unfortunate remarks you may have heard about made by our ambassador in Washington, who is no longer our ambassador in Washington. So I think as far as Israel's concerned, and America, hopefully, Boris Johnson will be a positive. He's a very unpredictable man. He's been I think President Trump described him as Britain's Trump. I'm not sure that helped him much in Britain, but he's an unpredictable man, but I believe he will. I'm confident he will do a good job, and I believe that he will either be extremely good or extremely bad. We have to hope that it's good. You may have heard of a gentleman in England called Jeremy Corbyn. Yes? Think Bernie Sanders. Now, Jeremy Corbyn is the leader of the Labour Party. And any time now, it is quite likely that the Labour Party will call for a vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson, the new Prime Minister. Now, it might not happen today, it's a bit late today, but it might not happen this week, or it might not happen for several weeks, but it probably will happen. And when it does happen, there is every possibility that they could win that vote of no confidence, and if they do, that will mean there will be a general election. If there's a general election in Britain, there is every likelihood that Jeremy Corbyn could win it and could become Prime Minister before the end of this year. I'm hoping not, and certainly many of us in England, we're doing every single thing we can to prevent it, but it is certainly a strong likelihood. And I don't think if he becomes Prime Minister, we're talking about the same quality of relationships between Britain and Israel or Britain and America as with Boris Johnson. Because Jeremy Corbyn, above everything else, despises the United States of America. That motivates everything that he does, including his hatred for Israel. He hates Israel because it's a satellite, in his mind, of the US. He hates Britain because we're an ally of America. He's an incredible man. He's also an anti-Semite, not just because he hates Israel, but he hates Jews anyway. That I've studied the man in depth, and that is a reality. On day one, when if he becomes prime minister, on day one he will declare his recognition of the state of Palestine. When that happens, Israel will withdraw its ambassador from London, quite rightly, and we will see a deterioration in relationships between Britain and Israel. And I'm sure with President Trump in the White House, he will also have a go at Britain, quite rightly also, if they effectively turn against Israel. So Britain's international relationships will suffer from day one if that man becomes our prime minister. I just want to say a word or two about Britain and Israel. I worked, for the last 5 years of my military service, I worked in the Prime Minister's office when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, and a little bit of Gordon Brown after that. And my role was to advise him on international terrorism and countering international terrorism. And I worked very closely in that capacity with not only Israeli intelligence agencies, but also the CIA and other US intelligence agencies. We worked very, very closely together. And I can tell you, you know anyway, that Britain and the United States has a very, very close intelligence relationship. What you may not appreciate, or you may, I don't know, is that Britain and Israel also have an incredibly close intelligence relationship. Very, very close, to the extent that we conduct joint intelligence operations with Israeli agencies, which we don't do with any other country in the world, but we do with Israel. We also have extremely close military relationships. And I was asked today about how British military people think of the IDF, and I can tell you for sure that with very few exceptions, serving and retired British soldiers and officers hold the IDF in the utmost regard. And I really mean in the utmost regard. We all know, and I told those people there at lunchtime, we all know that the British Army is the finest army the world's ever seen. Okay, maybe you don't all necessarily agree with that, but we are. But if you ask any British soldier which army he admires in the world apart from the British Army, number one will be the IDF. They have huge admiration and respect for the IDF, far more than you'd think when you just look at the general presentation of Britain. They're not taken in by the propaganda and the lies that are spewed out by organizations like the BBC and Sky about Israel. They know the reality because they fight these same enemies themselves in Iraq and Afghanistan, previously a similar kind of enemy in Northern Ireland. They know what these enemies are like. They know the Taliban is the same as Hamas. They know that Al-Qaeda is the same as Hezbollah. They know the Islamic State is the same as Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They know these organizations are the same thing with the same ideology and the same tactics, and they know how to fight them. And they know that the IDF fight them in the same way as they do. So they're not taken in by the lies and the nonsense that's churned out by these media organizations, by academics and so on. And that closeness is also manifested in a number of different ways. I'll just tell you very briefly, when I was working for the Prime Minister of the UK, we had a bomb attack, a series of bomb attacks in London on the 7th of July 2005 in the Underground and on a bus. A series of attacks. And at that time, I was coordinating intelligence input into our National Crisis Management Center, which is the same as the White House Situation Center, except a bit smaller. You know, we're not a big country, but we have the same kind of mechanisms. And it happened at 10 to 8 in the morning. Within 20 minutes, our National Crisis Management Center had been convened. And 5 minutes before the meeting began, I received a telephone call from the head of the Mossad station in London, who said to me, with immediate effect, any intelligence you require, any resources you require, any assets you want, anything you want done, pick the phone up and call me, or I will come and see you. But you are now, Britain is now, Israeli intelligence's number one operational priority until you resolve this situation. You you can't imagine, or you probably can imagine. I know many of you have served in the forces, or probably all of you have served in the forces or the intelligence services, and you probably can imagine what it feels like in that kind of stage when you didn't expect what happened to happen, and a friend, a good, true friend, phones you and says, "We're right behind you." I also got a phone call a little bit later from the head of the CIA station in London. Are there any French and Germans in here? Sorry, I like to know who I'm insulting before I do so. Okay, again, none who will admit to being French or German. I don't blame you, I have to say. But I didn't get a phone call from the French or the Germans. But then we didn't need one. So it's that kind of close relationship is quite extraordinary. And I could tell you myriad other stories about my experiences dealing with the Israeli government, the IDF, and Israel generally. I won't, and today, as I said, our relationships are extremely close. I won't gloss over the bad history we've had as well between Britain and Israel. Yes, in 1917, Britain created the Balfour Declaration, which was not just the British in our traditional imperious way saying, we insist on a national homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. That Balfour Declaration was the result of endorsements from the major countries around the world that we weren't fighting at the time. We were fighting Germany and others, so they didn't come into it. But the US supported the Balfour Declaration, as did most other major countries. Without that, the recreation of the State of Israel in 1948 would have been questionable, I think. But one other thing happened between the Balfour Declaration and the end of the First World War, which was that the British Army and our allies from Australia and New Zealand fought the Turks in Palestine, fought them out of Palestine and threw them out into Syria and then kicked them out of there and forced their surrender. If we hadn't got rid of the Turks out of the land of Palestine, I don't see myself how today it would be possible, or how in 1948 it would have been possible to recreate the State of Israel. And that was at the blood price of tens of thousands of British soldiers fighting in Palestine. And you may or may not know that among them was an organization called the Jewish Legion. And the Jewish Legion was a part of the British Army, which was formed in 1917, formed in 1917, and fought in Palestine in 1918. And this was the first formed Jewish fighting force since the Maccabees in the British Army. One of our soldiers of the Jewish Legion was Private David. He's here, yeah, he's come back. Private David Green, also known as David Ben-Gurion, was one of our privates. Golda Meir volunteered to join, but unlike today, we didn't take women in the British Army then, so she couldn't join. I'm sure she'd have been worth 100 of the men. But the Jewish Legion, before they left to fight in Palestine, they marched through the streets of London. These are Jews from London, from England, from Russia, from the United States of America, from Palestine itself. They marched through the streets of London, led by the band of the Coldstream Guards, one of our elite regiments, playing the Hatikva, their regimental march. They wore on their shoulder the Star of David, and their cap badge later became the menorah with the word Kadima under it. For those of you who don't speak Hebrew as well as I do, that means forward. Thank you. The leader of that organization was a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Patterson, who was he was actually Irish, but we brushed that under the carpet. He was a British Christian officer, who formed the Jewish Legion. After the war, he came to live in the United States of America. He lived in various different parts of the US, but eventually settled and died and was buried in California. He got very friendly during his time in America with a gentleman by the name of Ben-Zion Netanyahu, who was the father of Prime Minister Netanyahu. So friendly that when Ben-Zion Netanyahu and his wife had their first son, Jonathan. They named him after Jonathan Patterson. So the hero of Entebbe is named after a British Christian officer. I'm not going to go into enormous detail about the history. You'll be pleased to hear the history of Britain and Israel after that period, from the 1939 White Paper onwards, when Britain essentially betrayed its trust imposed upon it by the League of Nations to establish a Jewish national homeland in Palestine. And as a result of enormous pressure placed upon Britain by the Arabs, Britain restricted the immigration into Palestine by Jews, and as a result of that, a very large number of Jews, I don't know the number, some people have estimated 1 million Jews, lost their lives in the Holocaust who could have immigrated into Palestine and had their lives saved. And I, as a Briton, am deeply ashamed of that episode in our country's history. But there's no repairing it, but nevertheless, I'm very proud that today Britain and Israel are close friends, as I've described. I want to move on to a fight that I've been fighting now for the last 10 years or so, which is a fight against delegitimization of the State of Israel. I refuse to say that I support the right of Israel to exist. I don't. And I don't support the right of Britain to exist, or the United States to exist, or France or Australia. Why should we talk about the right of an established Western democracy to exist? Why should we talk about that? We shouldn't. But I do feel very strongly that I and anyone else who has strength and breath in their body to do so has a responsibility to stand up when a country like Israel and its armed forces are maligned in the way that Israel's forces are maligned. And I just want to tell you a couple of brief stories, and I appreciate I've been going on a long time already, but I do love the sound of my own voice. I was in a tank in the first Gulf War, which was 1991, and we invaded Iraq from Saudi Arabia, and we were attacking to the north and to the east. And at one point, I saw this huge, great column of Iraqi soldiers coming off from the flank, and I could see the front of the column. I couldn't see the back. It was so many across the desert, Iraqis traipsing forward, none of them with rifles. And I stopped at the front of the column, and I spoke to the commander, and he said, "I want to surrender. I want to surrender all these men." And I said, "I'm terribly sorry," in a typical British upper-class accent. "I'm terribly sorry, but I can't take your surrender now because we're attacking. But if you keep going south, I will get some other troops to come and take you prisoner in a couple of hours' time." And he said, "Okay, but one question rather. Why are you flying these huge, great flags in your tanks?" And we had enormous Union Jacks flying from our tanks. And I said, "Well, good question. The reason we're flying them is so the American Air Force doesn't bomb us from the air. They know we're friends." And he said, "Yeah, okay, I understand that, but why are you flying British flags?" And I said, "Well, because we're British." And he said, "No, you're not." And I scratched my head and I thought I was, and I said, "Yeah, we are." And he said, "Okay, well, tell me then, why are the British in Israel?" And I said, "We're not. This is your country. This is Iraq." And he said, No, we're in Israel. And what had happened is that these conscripts had been picked up from one bit of desert in Iraq and taken to another bit of desert in Iraq and told they were invading Israel. Unbelievable, maybe, but it's true. And of course, why? Because they have been brought up to hate Israel so much that it motivates them. The idea that they're going to invade and attack the Zionist entity is something that keeps them going and keeps them fighting. An incredible story, but true. And I told him also, when he realized we were actually Brits, he had a smile on his face when he knew he was going to be taken prisoner by the British Army, rather than the IDF that would have massacred and wiped them out and tortured them and cut arms and legs off them and done all the other things that the IDF would have done to them in their minds because they've been indoctrinated in this way. Why do I talk about that? Because it reflects the Arab world generally, the hatred that the Arab world has in it for Israel. Yes, I know, and I'm very pleased that the situation's changing at government level, so there's now more cooperation, and extensive cooperation in some cases between Arab countries and Israel. But the people, and including the people in, I won't say the West Bank, I get told off if I say the West Bank, so I'll say Judea and Samaria. I normally say the West Bank because I can't pronounce Judea and Samaria. But the people there are educated from birth. You know this better than I do. The people in Gaza are educated from birth to hate the Israelis. How are they going to come and form a peace with Israel when all their people are indoctrinated to hate and despise the Jews? So that's one issue, and that hatred, that propaganda has been transferred from the Arab world across the world. And in Britain and Europe, I hope to a lesser extent over here in the US, but the extent of anti-Israel propaganda from newspapers, radio stations, television stations, universities, high schools even, international organizations like the EU and the United Nations is visceral. And it is, ladies and gentlemen, it is the worst slur campaign in the history of humanity that's directed against Israel. And people ask, why is it that Israel can't do more? And why can't other people do more to counter that anti-Israel propaganda? It's such a huge thing. It is such an incredible campaign that's been running for many, many years now. To mention briefly my experience with the media, I speak a lot on the BBC, for example, about Afghanistan, Iraq, intelligence, terrorism, security, generally defense, Iranian tankers, this sort of thing, frequently. They don't ever want me to talk about Israel because they know that I will speak the truth, and that is not in line with their agenda. But I managed to pull the wool over their eyes during the last but one of the Gaza conflicts. I've forgotten what name it has, but that one. And I was in Israel, and I persuaded them to interview me on a number of radio and TV stations. And I went to the bureau in Jerusalem, the BBC bureau, and I arrived there to do about 10 interviews throughout the day. And they loved me. They thought, another civilized person in this hellhole of Jerusalem, full of Jews and Israelis and other unspeakables. Please, sit down. Sit down on our nice, comfortable sofa. Wi-Fi, it's there for you. You'll have coffee. You'll have lunch later on. All of these things. Please feel at home. And then I went in and did my first interview in this glass studio cubicle thing. Live interview on BBC News Channel. They were all watching on their monitors, these staff in the bureau. And I walked out of the studio, having done it. They'd seen what I said. There were no more sofas, no more Wi-Fi, no more coffee, no more lunch later. None of that, just cold shoulder. Except for one person in that bureau who was an Arab Israeli reporter who knew the reality and who did give me sofas, Wi-Fi, and all the other stuff. And again, I tell you this story because it illustrates that these people knew nothing about Israel or the idea. If they'd been brought in to cover the conflict in one way or another, many of them were technicians. But they hated me because I spoke the truth about Israel. Final story I want to share with you. I speak from time to time in the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva when they're debating either a conflict in Israel or a report about a conflict in Israel. And I say report in the loosest possible terms because it basically amounts to a propaganda manual against Israel. By the way, the UN, when they write these reports, they don't have military experts. They just don't. And it's incredible that you could write a credible report about a war without military experts. The nearest they came was when Judge Goldstone wrote his since discredited report about Operation Cast Lead. They had a military advisor then. Again, anyone here from Ireland? Okay. I can be brave then. Their military advisor was an Irish Army colonel, retired, who wrote the most despicable things. He was a known anti-Semite. But apart from that, the Irish army has never fought a war, ever in their history, never, not one. Most of the Goldstone report was about air operations against the terrorists in Palestine, in Gaza. The Irish do not have an air force. They've got 2 helicopters. They get used for ferrying VIPs and generals around the place. So this is the quality of the report that the reports they write. The first time I spoke at the UN, it was in relation to this caste-led report. As soon as I finished speaking, I left the room, and I got followed out by an ambassador, a lady ambassador, quite short, from a North African country, who said, she said to me, Colonel Kemp, I'll try and do the accent, I'm not good at accents, Colonel Kemp, that for the lies that you have told this body today, your soul will burn in hell for all eternity. I was delighted. Because I knew who she was, and I knew what her perspective was, and I knew that if I'd annoyed her, then I was annoying the right person, I said the right stuff. I get a lot, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not asking for sympathy here. I get a lot of anti-Semitic abuse directed at me all the time. And again, please, I'm pleased to have it. I'm not trying to underplay the horror of anti-Semitism, but I know that if I'm getting anti-Semitic abuse, and I'm not even Jewish, I'm actually a fanatical Roman Catholic, the worst kind of Christian, I know that, again, I'm angering the right type of people. This is the problem that we're facing, not just in the media, not just in academia, but of these diplomats, these so-called diplomats who have no concept and no understanding of what's going on. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to conclude, if I may, by, and I'm happy if there's time afterwards to take questions, but I'd like to conclude by commending Israel is, which is really what we're here, I hope anyway, what we're here to understand today. Led by Eyal and Inbar. You've heard from Eyal already, you'll be hearing from Inbar shortly. She is, I have to apologize because Inbar is South African. And she doesn't speak English. She speaks Hebrew. But you'll be hearing from them. And they are wonderful people. I've been traveling with them now for just over a week. I met them for the first time a month ago in the UK. And I was so impressed by what they were doing and the project they were organizing that I agreed to give up about 10 days of my time to come here and help them to spread the word among people such as yourselves in the United States of America. Eyal has agreed if we get enough support from here, he will double my salary. But the problem is, as he pointed out to me, twice naught is naught, or zero, whatever you call it over here. It's not very much anyway. But they're wonderful people. I urge you to listen to what they say. I urge you to support them as best you can. I just want to tell you, I was in Israel about a week ago, just over a week ago before I came here. And I spoke to a group of 25,000 young people who just left high school in Israel and were about to join the IDF in the course of the next few months. 25,000 young people, and I know that most or all of you perhaps have served in the IDF, so you don't need me to explain this to you. But of course, most of them don't want to be soldiers. Most of them want to be high-tech company CEOs or whatever, or plumbers, or their mothers would love them to be doctors and lawyers. But they don't want to be soldiers, but they know they've got to be soldiers. They know they have to defend their country. And what really impressed me talking to some of those young people was the enthusiasm and the positivity that they demonstrated to me as they know they're about to spend 2 years in military service, when most people of their age will be going into university and doing nothing except maybe 3 years, doing nothing except maybe smoking a few drugs, drinking lots of booze, and meeting lots of women, or in the case of the women, lots of men. So I was deeply impressed by these people. And also, I was on the Gaza border myself many times in the last year, 18 months, since this rioting has been going on. And I speak to young IDF soldiers there, and I look into their eyes, and they're exposing themselves day in and day out to lethal danger. They know that by doing their job there on the front line, they're risking a sniper's bullet, they're risking a bomb being thrown at them, they're risking death from numerous different means. And the bravery of those young people is absolutely incredible. And you've all done it. All of you, I'm sure, have done it, so you know it and you've been brave yourself. But you still, I mean, I was a soldier for 30 years, but I've forgotten what that's all like. I'm an old fat man now, not as old as some in this room. But you know, their bravery is palpable. And not just Israeli soldiers from Israel, but lone soldiers from places like South Florida. And I know that this part of the world produces a lot of very brave lone soldiers. What I know also is that when they've finished for the day or for the couple of days or whatever it is they're there, being subject to this horrific danger, they then go back to their barracks or whatever it is, and they see on the news that they are, as Ayel said, they're baby killers. They see this disgusting stuff churned out about them. Now, it's wrong. It is wrong. Purely, it would be wrong if they were British soldiers, wrong if they're American soldiers, and it's wrong if they're Israeli soldiers risking their life for their country. And by the way, their fight is our fight as well. It's our fight, so they're risking their life for us. It's wrong that they should be attacked in the way they are. I feel absolutely horrible about it, and that's why I do everything I possibly can. And that's why I'd commend to you Israelis, because they're part of the fight. They are fighting and helping these young people after they leave the IDF to fight against the kind of disgusting delegitimization and lies that they're told. Ladies and gentlemen, please do what you can to support them, and thank you very much for listening.
Before we're going to take questions from you guys, Colonel Kemp was yesterday promoted from Colonel to Major General in the Boca Parliament. Okay, so he's now a Major General in the British Legion in the IDF, and now our President Amnon Gershoni is going to promote him to Lieutenant General. So, Amnon. After, first the promotion.
I gave them already a big hug to them, your behalf, okay? We are very proud having you here with a great respect to you. Not just to the fact that you are such of a great supporter for Israel, but to the fact that you're actually a fighter for the freedom of the free countries in this world. And thank you very much for your service. We admire you. We love you with a lot of respect to you. And again, on behalf of our friends here, the parliament members and guests, I would like to give you a big hug. It means that you are always welcome, and we love you very much, General. Major. Thank you very, very much. חבריה, לא ללכת, יש שאלות. גם תשובות. Thank you so much.
Okay, so before we take the first question, I just want to mention that on the far left there's some flyers there, and thank you very much, Hillel, who just filled up a card and made a donation. There's some cards there. You can either take one, fill it out, or you can put your information on their computer and they'll get in touch with you.
Please sit down, it's not over yet.
And we'll turn to questions. So, first question for Danny. Colonel Kemp, if you don't mind, they're going to ask you questions.
Hi.
Shalom.
Shalom uvracha. First of all, it's one of the best lectures or speeches that I heard here.
Thank you.
Number two, it's an honor to have met you and to listen to you. It really is. My question to you is, you have been around the world, you have seen other militaries. What would have happened if there was an entity like Gaza, 40 miles away from London, or from Baghdad, or from another capital around the world that you know, and they were shooting missiles at civilians? What would the other militaries do?
Thank you. An excellent question. And before I answer it, can I ask, if I come back again, could you make me a field marshal? It's great to be promoted twice on 2 consecutive nights, but it's a real honor also. Thank you very much, and thank you for this pin and for your kind words. I really do appreciate it. We don't need to speculate about what would happen if rockets were fired at the United Kingdom from a short distance away, because it happened. It happened in 1944 when the Germans fired rockets at United Kingdom for a period of months after we invaded Europe on D-Day together with our American and Canadian allies. And actually, those rockets, yes, they were more powerful in terms of their explosive content and in terms of their range than most rockets being fired from Gaza into Israel. But the principle is the same, and actually the number of rockets fired in one day into Israel recently exceeded the number of rockets ever fired in a single day into the United Kingdom in 1944 by the German war machine. Can you imagine the comparison? And I'll tell you exactly what we did. We didn't wait for the first rocket to be fired in 1944. We got intelligence that they were planning and they were constructing rockets to fire at us, and Winston Churchill sent over 1,000 bombers to carpet bomb the facility in which these rockets were being developed and manufactured. And in the process of doing that, he killed hundreds of civilians who were not connected to this project. So that's what we would have done, and that's what we did. And we then continued. They did launch rockets. They kept launching the rockets because this raid didn't stop it. And whenever we could find them, we went and bombed the launch sites, and we didn't care what happened around them because our citizens were being killed in large numbers by these rockets in Britain. And what would happen today? Well, what would happen? Of course, it's obvious we would do what Israel does today. We would hit back at the people firing the rockets. Without a question, without a shadow of a doubt, wherever they came from, we would fire back at them, we would bomb them, and we might even invade them on the ground. And I'm sure every other country in the world would do the same thing. So, you know, I've been in Israel. I'm sure most of you, or all of you perhaps, have been in Israel while these rockets are being fired from Gaza. I know what it's like. I've been in places like Sderot when rockets have been fired. I've been in houses where rockets have scored a direct hit shortly before. I know how lethal they are. I know how terrifying they are. And I know that Israel is absolutely right to do what it does in terms of hitting back at them. And yes, innocent civilians die in that process sometimes, but it is not illegal. It is not a war crime. It's the way you have to deal with people who are firing rockets at you or carrying out other terrorist attacks against you from behind the protection of human shields. Unfortunately, the human shields, sometimes suffer. And those people, such as the United Nations and other bodies who claim that Israel is carrying out war crimes and who criticize Israel, attack Israel for doing that, what they're doing, ladies and gentlemen, what they're doing is they're encouraging the terrorists, because they're showing the terrorists that what they're trying to do works, that the whole purpose of these attacks is not to kill Israelis, it's not to create damage to Israel, it's not to bring down Israel, because they know they can't do that, they're not strong enough to do that. The whole purpose of it is to cause a reaction from Israel which does kill their own civilian population and which creates international criticism and condemnation of Israel. So these idiots at the UN, the EU, universities, they're playing into the hands of terrorists. They've got blood on their hands because they're encouraging them to do it again and again and again. A long answer, I apologize, but I think that's the reality.
Colonel Kemp, thank you for what you gave us. I loved every word came out from your mouth. You are not only a friend of Israel, but you are a noble British citizen. As far as my question, you mentioned Jeremy Corbyn as a head of the Labour Party, if he becomes a prime minister, the first thing he would do, declare the Palestinian entity as a Palestinian state. My question is, as a prime minister, he can do it without the British Parliament approval, or there are certain things that he can do?
No. He can do that without anyone's approval. He just has to do it. He just has to declare it. He'll probably get his cabinet's approval, which he doesn't have to have, but he probably would get that. And the members of his cabinet will be like him, so they will approve it. And one thing I would like to say about that is that, it's not just in the abstract damaging relations. It'd be a disgrace for Britain with all its links and connections and responsibilities in relation to the State of Israel. It would be a disgrace for that relationship to be damaged in that way. And it's not just trade. It's one of the most critical things is intelligence. We gain enormously valuable intelligence from the Israelis. We give Israelis valuable intelligence to them. I think it works better for us than it does for them, but it is a two-way street. And I believe also that if Corbyn was the Prime Minister, and he did cause this damage to relations, I believe, from my knowledge of Israel, that Israel would still pass life-saving intelligence to us, even if he said that the whole state should be annihilated. They would still give him life-saving intelligence because they are a moral people, whereas he is an immoral man. But he wouldn't accept it. He would reject it. He would say, I'm not having this intelligence from this illegal entity which has probably been gained by torture. So, British citizens would suffer as a result.
Colonel, I had the pleasure of watching you on the internet before, as I'm sure so did many other people here, and thank you very much for coming here. But seeing you here in person is a real treat. And I thank you particularly for supporting this organization, which is really fighting what I think is the current most important war that Israel is fighting. My question is to Inbal. First of all, congratulations on what seems to be a terrific job that you're doing on a very important task. Equipping ambassadors of Israel with the tools that they need. The reality is all of us here, as many other Israelis all over the country, are also ambassadors. Do you have a website where we can log into and get some information and some tools to do the same job?
You want to answer? So we do have a website. It's under construction at the moment. No, you can go on it and you can see everything there. It is a great idea to put some of the tools that we give the soldiers on there, because I agree with you 100%. These tools are for everyone, and everyone is facing this problem. I will also add that the tools that we give in these workshops, in the future, we are also looking to expand. We spoke about lone soldiers here, but we also look to expand with other communities, with other Jewish communities, with other people, like programs from Massa, or people that are coming to Israel, whether Jewish or non-Jewish, and they're also going to be going back. So yes, we're always looking to expand, and we hope to find ourselves here doing workshops also for people like you guys in the future. Do you want to add anything? Why, thank you.
To our Catholic friend, I want to tell you that if you will do a DNA test, you may find that you have ancestors among us. I never liked the British humor, but you are amazing. Amazing.
Thank you.
Now I want to ask you a very naive question. How come you are an only one in this awful, awful world that we live now that is so outspoken and so open? And why don't, like bees, why don't they come to you? Why can't you gather more of them? Because I cannot understand. I live in this country almost 50-something years. And I never thought that I will see anti-Semitism in this country. And I don't understand why. Why do people hate us? It's a very naive question, but maybe you as a goy can tell us.
I'm not just a goy, I'm a Shabbat goy. If anyone wants me to hire me to operate the elevator on Shabbat, I'm very happy to do that, or other equally equal services. Before I answer the main question you asked, I should say I sat in the lobby of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem just over about 18 months ago with a Jewish friend of mine from Washington, D.C., who was over there as well, and he DNA tested me. He said, I cannot believe there's not some Jewish in you. Yeah. Well, I can't really reveal that. No, I can. The tests came back, and apparently I'm 100% Anglo-Saxon and not a drop of Jewish DNA in me at all, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending how you look at it. I'd probably be cleverer if I actually had Jewish DNA in me. And I know that Americans think that if you speak with a British accent, you're intelligent, which is not really true in my case. I wish it was. I think you said, why am I the only one? Well, the answer to that is I'm not, by a long way, I'm not the only one. There are many other, certainly in the UK, and I'm sure over here as well, there are many other non-Jewish people who are prepared to stick up and stick their neck out to support Israel. Well, there are a number, and I mean, you have to look for not in Britain, but over here you've got Christians United for Israel, which is the largest pro-Israel organization in the country. So that's just one organization. There are lots of individuals, and one person I would mention in the UK is a gentleman by the name of Douglas Murray, who you may have possibly heard of. He's not a soldier, he's a journalist, I don't know if he's Christian or not, but he isn't Jewish. And he is very outspoken in support of Israel, as are others. But one point I would like to make is that most British officers or former officers are unable to do what I do because while they're serving, of course, you can't speak out on these sort of subjects politically. It's not acceptable. You can't do it. And when you leave, most, I'd say not necessarily most, but a large proportion of British officers go into the security consultancy world or some other security world. And many of them are working for Arab governments, either as contractors or consultants or whatever. It's not very wise if you're working for Egypt, for example, to openly declare your support for Israel. So that's the reason, one of the reasons. Another reason is because most British officers spend quite a large chunk of their lives fighting, and when they retire, they don't want to carry on fighting if they don't have to. You may ask why I do, and that's because I'm a very odd person, I have to say. I'm a crazy person, but and as I mentioned before, I do like being attacked. I've always enjoyed being attacked because I find I can counterattack more effectively than people can attack me. But I'm sure, I've no doubt about that. But I think, as I said, most soldiers and ex-soldiers share my views on Israel and the IDF. But I don't know. I mean, there are one or two, but very few.
And what about anti-Semitism? Why do they hate us?
Right. I mean, let me. It's a long. Why is there anti-Semitism? It's a convoluted question or a convoluted answer that I'm sure you have all considered many times and probably know the answer better than I do about it. But what I would say is that in Europe, anti-Semitism is very much on the rise. Very much on the rise. It's a dreadful and despicable thing, and I do what I can to fight against anti-Semitism. I'm a member of a group called the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism in the UK, which is an increasingly effective group. I'm also a member of a group called Jewish Human Rights Watch, which is also quite effective against anti-Semitism. But the reason I think that I'm confident the reason that anti-Semitism is on the rise is because of the increased Islamic population that is in Europe now. And people like Jeremy Corbyn, he is an anti-Semite. He's been an anti-Semite all his life. He will never admit that, of course, but he is. And his comments and his history show that. But that's not the primary reason why his party has become anti-Semitic and hating Israel. The reason is because they want the votes of Islamic immigrants in the country. And that is the overwhelming thing. And it's a combination of political dominance, political votes being required, and fear. Because, of course, there is, across Europe, there are Islamic jihadist groups who want to attack us. And foolish people think that by appeasing Muslims and by saying, yeah, you hate the Jews, you hate Israel, we do too, that's going to save their neck. Well, of course, it won't save their neck. Their neck will be chopped off at the right moment, like the rest of us. But that is, I think, a big contributor to the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. Even though people pretend it's to do with the policies of the Israeli government, it isn't that. I mean, I'm not anti-Muslim, not at all. I've fought and I've won medals for defending Muslim countries while I was serving in the army. I'm not anti-Muslim, but what I do recognize is that the overwhelming majority of Muslims are taught from birth to hate the state of Israel.
Eyal Ingbag, first of all, congratulations on the organization, and thank you for bringing really a man of this stature to our humble abode here in Miami. Colonel, you follow in the footsteps of people like Ord Wingate, who weren't Jews but greatly helped in the creation and the defense of the state of Israel. You're doing it from afar, but you can really count on one hand those international, I would say, spokespeople who defend Israel at every turn. So it means a lot that you're here. Two quick questions. One question. You talked about how behind the scenes, how there's a lot of interaction between the Israelis and the British. I think we all know that. Do you ever see a time in our lifetime when that interaction will become overt and where you'll see the British government supporting Israel in a way that Boris Johnson just said he's a Zionist? That was something that you won't hear very often. The Z word is not said out loud these days. And my second question is, will you ever get into politics? Have you ever thought of doing that?
Can I on Ord Wingate, I know that wasn't your question, but you may or may not know that Ord Wingate is buried here in the United States of America. He's in Arlington Cemetery. And the reason he's there is because he was towards the end of the Second World War, he was commanding British forces in Burma, and his plane got shot down. And in the plane, there was something like, I forget the number exactly, but something like 5 Brits and 8 Americans. And their remains could not be separated. Probably DNA could have done it today, but then no. And so they decided to bury the corpses all in the place where the majority came from, which was the US, and therefore they're in Washington. And another interesting thing about Wingate is that, again, you may or may not know this, but David Ben-Gurion said that if Wingate had not been killed in the Second World War, he would have been the first chief of staff of the IDF. So the first commander of the IDF would have been a Christian officer, which is quite a bizarre thing to think. In terms of whether I'm going to go into politics or not, I would personally, rather than be a politician, I would prefer to slash both my wrists and lie down in an open sewer in Kabul and slowly bleed to death and die of the kind of poisons that come into your bloodstream from that. So that's a sort of a slight answer to that question. What was your first question? Okay, yes. Yes, it's a good point. I mean, this cooperation is enormous and continuing. And I think about 5 years ago, David Cameron made a speech to the Knesset, a really good speech, actually, Cameron being a former prime minister. And he mentioned this relationship briefly, but he mentioned it. And it's the only time I've heard a politician or a political leader overtly mentioning this relationship. So that was a very good thing, I thought. Things have improved a little bit in this area. We've had a royal visit from Prince William, I think it was. William or Harry? William. Prince William went to Israel, which is, You know, the Queen and other senior members of the royal family have visited every country in the Middle East with virtually no exceptions, including places like Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, all of these countries, never Israel until, I think it was last year, when eventually we managed to drag one of the royals out there. And it's not the royals that don't like it, it's actually the Foreign Office, the British Foreign Office, which has resisted the relationships with Israel that we enjoy with other countries. I'm optimistic. I hope Boris Johnson is the person who crushes this Foreign Office, what we call camel corps, which is the nucleus of the Foreign Office, which hates Israel and loves those people they think are Israel's enemies. And they're also out of date because Arab countries are now, as I mentioned earlier, increasingly cooperating with Israel. So I don't know, but I'm optimistic.
We're going to have time for one last question, but before that, I just wanted to say, usually we don't do that in the parliament, but these are the green flyers. Inside, there's more information about them, and we urge, everybody to do what he can. Colonel Kemp took 10 days of his time. He's not getting paid for this, or these two wonderful kids. And again, we encourage you, whatever you can. And I'm going to steal Uzi's thunder, which always says it doesn't matter how much you give. It just matters that you're in the game. Thank you. One last question.
Thank you for being here, Colonel. I have a question. Today in the Israeli news, I heard 3 hours ago, our former Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, was on his way to Switzerland. And he got a message from the Ministry of Justice and the Foreign Minister of Israel. Don't go there because there is an order to arrest you as soon as you will be there because of war crimes. I was shocked, and he said, I'm going anyway. They convinced him not to go, and then finally he decided to stay in Israel. What is your opinion about that in Great Britain? This is outrageous.
Yeah, it is deeply outrageous. And we had a similar problem in Britain for a number of years. It's called universal jurisdiction, whereby a lawyer in one country can bring charges and bring a court case against somebody from a different country, for example, from Israel, and it only seems to apply to Israel, as a result of which a person could be arrested in our country, even though the crimes are nothing to do with us. They allegedly were committed in Israel. Fortunately, again, it was David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, overturned that and made an executive order of some sort that it couldn't be done anymore in the UK. And so it is not a danger that, at the moment, faces IDF officers or politicians in the UK. But I do know that, speaking to some of them, some IDF officers and some politicians, they're still reluctant to travel to Europe because they really don't know, and they don't want to spend time behind bars. So it's something that I absolutely reject and find horrifying, as won't come as any surprise to you. One other thing I'd just like to mention before I do honestly shut up, apart from thanking you for your support for Israel, and really repeating my endorsement of them. I'd just like to say, I've been involved to an extent with discussions over the peace process, the current peace process that's going on, involving Jason Greenblatt and Jared Kushner and others. And I believe there is zero chance of that peace process is coming to any kind of real fruition. I think that what we will see as a result of that process is we will see a proposal put forward which will be accepted in broad terms by the Israeli government, and it will be rejected. It will be accepted in broad terms by the Arab governments in the region, or some of them at least, and it will be absolutely rejected by the Palestinians. And that will be a good thing in my view. It's not peace, but it does show the world where the problem lies. I think it'll be very good in terms of the world understanding of the problem with the Israel-Palestine situation, which is not Israel, but it's the Palestinians. Now, how effective that is, I really don't know. One thing I am confident of, and I don't say this with any relish or any pleasure, but one thing I'm confident of is there can be no two-state solution in that territory for two reasons. One, because the Palestinians do not want their own state and a Jewish state. They want only the annihilation of the Jewish state. And the second reason is that the IDF cannot leave Judea and Samaria, because if they do, even if the Palestinians have come to some kind of agreement with them, with the Israelis, and genuine peace, that territory will still be weakly defended and will be open to being used by countries like Iran, the successors of the Islamic State, etc., to attack Israel from. So there is, in my opinion, not going to be a two-state solution. There is not going to be peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I think it's a tragedy for the Palestinians. I do not think it's a real tragedy for the Israelis. Yes, of course, it's a problem. Yes, of course, it's a major setback to be at war with your neighbors. But we've seen how incredibly Israel has flourished since not only 1948, but before. And I have every confidence that even in this situation, which is not particularly optimistic, we will see Israel continue to flourish and also to become accepted more and more greatly in the world. Thank you very much, and thanks for listening.
I'm sorry? Ken.
Wonderful. So just before going, if you can sit for 60 seconds, it will not be more than that. I will highly appreciate it. Thank you. I want to thank again for the Parliament for giving us the opportunity speaking here tonight. I want to thank Richard Kemp that did a long journey and 10 intensive days in low-rank hotels. Yeah. Just about how you can help us. So Israel is as an NGO, and we are highly appreciate if you will support us to do part of the campaign we do right now to raise $250,000 because we want to get the same amount from the ministry. It's a kind of a matching agreement, and each one of dollars, even 50 more, can help us reaching that limit. You can donate by two simple ways. First one is in this brochure there is a page inside that you can choose what is the amount. Even leave your credit card details and bring it to us. We will take care and send you the receipt by email. The second option, you can leave your email on the computer standing both sides next to the doors. Write your email and name, and you will send you after the event a link that you will connect you for the newsletter of the NGO, because we want to come again and to show you the success and to do something for the bigger picture with the vision of supporting and doing something very good for the young Jewish young people in Israel and here. Thank you very much for everyone. We are here for questions. Excuse me? What? We will be here till tomorrow evening. If someone is interested and think there is people that here in this room or others that we should meet in order to get this goal, we highly appreciate it. Thank you very much.